there's lots that goes on, lots that changes, lots that evolves, and I think it's important that we do that. And I stay on the kind of the news for that stuff. I read it every day. I keep up with what acquisitions and everything are happening, to kind of let that get that information over to you guys. So I've got 4 kind of trends slash big things that have happened this year. I'm going to kind of break those 4 down, and for each of them, I've got kind of what's happened, why it's happening, and then what's the opportunity for you as a podcaster or potential podcaster as well. Sorry, I'm not always looking at the camera because our reference screen is right next to it, so I keep looking at myself. Okay, so my first big kind of trend, which we've seen really, really, really strong in the first half of this year, is that audio is the new gold rush medium. What do I mean by that? So over the last 12-ish years, since the internet and social media has really kicked off, we've seen the evolution of what is the kind of in vogue medium change and evolve, and then they've slowly stacked on top of each other as all of these big media companies want to take up more and more and more of our time. So we started off and we had MySpace, early Facebook, and it's primarily text-based. You're communicating with each other via posts, you're talking to each other. Before that, you've got blogs, you have emails, etc. So we start with text. Then we got photography. Everyone started having a camera with a great phone on it. We could then, faster connections and more server storage meant we could put unlimited photos everywhere. And then a few years ago, we saw the big video pivot. Facebook came out and Mark Zuckerberg said, we are a video company, we're not a social media company, because the vast majority of what gets consumed on Facebook is videos made by people for other people. YouTube is huge. We've seen things like TikTok, which is like this micro video sharing. And now, even though audio is the oldest medium, we go back to radio, and podcasting has been around in some format for 15 plus years. But we're now seeing the kind of the attention of all of these big companies and all of these big creators now turn to audio, because it's like the last frontier in where people can take your time and where they can get attention and where they can produce content for people. Why it's key and different is that it actually exists very, very differently to any of the other formats, which are all visual. Both photography, reading, video all require you to look. And to have, so you have to look at all of them. You can't do it passively. You can't walk away from a photo and still enjoy it. You can't walk away from a blog post and still enjoy it. So what is magic about audio is that it unlocks a vast amount of people's potential time and attention that otherwise is locked to those other forms of content. You can't passively enjoy a bunch of photography whilst you're working, but you can with a podcast and you can with audio. So audio is this new form where, or not new, but, newly kind of focused on medium, where everyone's now going, great. So people do 4 hours of screen time a day, and we all, we're all like starting to think about how much time we spend doing screen time and how much time we're scrolling. But there's this, 10, 12, 14 hours a day where you could passively be consuming audio. And we've seen apps like Clubhouse like really aggressively push into that space. So we've seen a great explosion. We've seen Clubhouse, and then we've seen the kind of competitors to that come in, Spotify's Green Room, Mark Cuban's Fireside, all of these other ones. Facebook is launching their what they're calling a podcasting platform, but it's not quite, but it's audio on Facebook. As everyone is kind of going like, right, we've saturated the screen time attention span of your life. How do we then get the rest of your life? And that's really exciting, because it means for people that already are content creators in the audio space, you've already got a leg up because you're there and you're started. But you also got the chance that there's going to be lots more new audience in that space too. So, lots of people jumped on the Clubhouse train that were never podcast listeners, but will now become podcast listeners because they found that they enjoyed listening to content rather than watching content. There are creators as well who were, say, visual creators, video creators, who then tried out Clubhouse and were like, actually, I really enjoy doing audio. And they will then bring their audience into the audio medium as well. So there's a kind of rising tide lifts all ships approach here, where just every big company and every big creator focusing on growing their audio audience will have a kind of like positive knock-on effect to everyone else, even if those aren't directly podcasting to begin with. Clubhouse, lots of people talked about Clubhouse being something that might negatively impact podcasting. And actually the people who have podcasts that used Clubhouse correctly, in my opinion, or not necessarily correctly, but well, saw an uplift in their downloads because they were using it as a bridge medium to another medium. And they were using the kind of informal, casual medium of Clubhouse, which is unplanned and is conversational, to then bring people to a more planned, more formalized, more thought out medium, which is podcasting. And they actually, rather than seeing it as a competitor, they're using it to enhance their podcast and as a gateway to their podcast. So what's the opportunity for you as a creator? If you're looking to have, if you've already got a podcast, or if you're looking to have a podcast, the main thing is all of these new apps that are coming out, get on them, spend some time on them, commit, doesn't need to be a massive amount, but maybe 10 hours to each of them. If you were on Clubhouse early and you'd spent 10 hours, you'll get a feel for whether it's going to work for you or not, because every single one of them, the companies that make them are going to put a massive push behind them because they want them to be a success. Spotify had its Green Room ads all over its own app for like 2 solid weeks. And there's just free listeners there. If you go there and you're creating and you were running rooms, like, loads of people that don't know who you are we're going to have seen you. And, even if you did it just for the first 2 weeks, you're going to have picked up something, and you've got a chance to diversify your audience, get new people, and also test out all these new apps on the hope that one of them might be the one that becomes the next YouTube or the next Facebook. None of them might. Clubhouse might be gone in 6 months. Green Room might be gone in 6 months. But if there's anything we've learned from 10 plus years of watching social apps rise and fall, is that there's a low risk to reward ratio, in the sense that it costs you very little to be on these apps early, but the benefit from being an early mover can be really massive. The people that were very early YouTubers, that were very early Facebook, that were very early Instagram, have managed to reap kind of outsized rewards from that. So sometimes it can feel like, do I have time to do this? There's, not that many people on the app. I'm talking to rooms with a handful of people in. But make the effort, make the profile, put a little bit of time in, because any one of them might be the one that in 10 years' time has 1 billion users. And you've got that, week 1 profile, you've got the great username that you locked in before everyone came on. And you've got, a huge following just based on the kind of the time and the compounding. So that's the first big thing to take note of, is just there's this big focus. Audio is the new gold rush. Everyone's pushing there. Netflix has hired its first head of podcasts. They're going to be moving into the audio space. Audible, which has, always been an audio book platform. They've launched a bunch of premium podcasts, and Audible, I guarantee it will slowly just become a paid for audio content platform, and they will start to lose the distinction between books and podcasts. And it will just become, Audible's where you go to listen to premium audio content. Spotify have made huge acquisitions and locked in great deals with people like Joe Rogan and Barack Obama. There's money here, and everyone's betting big on it, and that's good for everyone who's in that space. So if there's any questions, put them in, and I'll take them after I'll do the next one, and then we'll have done 2 of my 4. I'll take some questions, and then we'll do. Kane, have you got anything to add whilst we're on kind of audio being the gold rush that you can think of?
Yeah, let's use Rob as the sort of the golden child on that. So Clubhouse comes out, he's one of the first people on it. He spends 100 days straight on it and generates 250,000 followers. That translates to a huge uptick in his podcast downloads, his YouTube subscribers, Instagram followers, and leads for business, et cetera, et cetera. So there's sort of a golden example of get there early, put a bit of time in, bet on it. And it may only be 2 hours a day, and maybe you can't dedicate that, but even if you do half of that, but you're active on it daily, you're really putting the effort in on these early platforms, it can really help translate to podcast downloads. And Rob is a huge advocate of saying, okay, it's not just my podcast now, it's my show. So he is on YouTube, he's on TikTok, he's on all these places, just hedging his bets on where it's going to go viral. And it's not just audio platforms, like you mentioned, Tom, that are very viral. It is these short form ones such as TikTok and Reels. And that's such an easy way to get those good numbers. And you could find hundreds of thousands of people per month that, if your TikToks are excerpts of your podcast and they're branded and it's very clear that it's part of your podcast, and your bio and your account is sort of sharp and professional, people will automatically, once they've done that, they'll reach out for your Instagram or your YouTube or your podcast. And it's just building your own content ecosystem. So I think it is important to be across and on all of these platforms, just to sort of ensure you get these good downloads. And it's worked for Rob. It's just a case of being everywhere and being omnipresent, but putting the effort in early, and then hopefully that pays off.
Yeah, and we saw with Rob and a load of other kind of people on Clubhouse that if you're a creator on a platform early, and there's less competition for audience, Rob accrued more Clubhouse followers in, I think, 6 weeks than the last, 8 years on Instagram, just because at that point there was a deficit of creators. There were more people wanting to use the app than there were people creating great content. So the algorithm was in his favor, and, done for him, Clubhouse filled rooms of people that were hungry to use the app and get content. So, when you are in a new space, it's good to jump on early and create stuff early, because, the big creators aren't going to come straight away. Big creators will want to see if it pans out. Someone like, the Paul brothers or any of the really notable influencers, they're going to want to see if something pans out before they start investing their time there. But that is then a golden opportunity for people that want to carve a bit of space for themselves to jump in and use that time early. It's something else I talk about a bunch with podcasting, which is there is actually comparatively a really tiny amount of active podcasts. There is about 200 to 250,000 active podcasts, and that is podcasts that produce consistent weekly content. When you compare that to the number of active YouTube channels, which is about 37 million, all churning out content, the amount of active Facebook profiles, Instagram profiles, and all of those are competing for your daily screen time, whereas all of those podcasters are just competing for a much wider amount of space. So you've got less competition in a bigger space to compete in. And it means that, comparatively, podcasting is still a great place to start and kick off and grow a following from.
To add on to that, sort of talking about the whole early adopter thing, one thing that we see every single day is people thinking that they might not get any downloads because they're in such a small or sub niche, but that's just not the case. It really depends what your goal is. You can make huge amounts of money, you can develop really good connections, and you could only get 1,000, 2,000 downloads per month. But if you're in a small niche and you're the only person there, you're an early adopter, that could generate you 6-7 figures income a year. So if you're one of those people that haven't started your podcast yet and you're umming and ahhing, you think, oh, there's not going to be enough people that are interested in this, or or whatever it may be, it's just a case of starting, because you don't need tremendous downloads. I think things like YouTube, where you see all the people that are 100,000, they're millionaires, they get 20 million views or whatever, they've been doing it for 10 years. It's not really the same case with podcasting. I think depending on what you're trying to achieve, if it's you're trying to do it to build your business and your brand, being in a really small niche and just getting started as early as possible with as little competition as possible is where you're going to carve out that space. So you're now that go-to person in your niche. So I think very much doesn't matter whether it's podcasting, an audio app, if it's a new platform, whatever, I think you just need to get in there early and sort of build your brand as the first or one of the early adopters of that.
Yeah, and thank you, Alex. There's a rare bit of privacy to podcasting as well, because no one can see your downloads or your subscribers other than you. And I think that definitely gets taken for granted as a really big advantage. With YouTube, Instagram, all of the platforms, all of your numbers are transparent. People can see your followers, they can see your likes, and people are fickle and they make judgments based on, if that video hasn't got 100k views, it can't be that good. But with podcasting, there is this rare bit of privacy, and those numbers are yours. and people are making a judgment on what shows they should and shouldn't listen to just based on the quality of the content. And that's really great, because it means there is a bit of a kind of fake it till you make it, and you can make a great show and you can compound your listens over time without worrying that having that extra level of worry that people are going to see that you don't get 10,000 downloads and are then going to judge you because of that. It's just another level of angst you don't have with podcasting, which is great.
Definitely.
Cool. So my second kind of big trend for this year is a change in listening habits and listening trends. So it's been a roller coaster of, in 18 months, people keep saying like post-COVID world, but we're still not there. We're still living with it, and lots of countries are still struggling with it, and it will be with us in some form for a while. But it has massively impacted the way people listen to podcasts. There are broad trends with podcasting, and for a long time, lots of people use their daily commute as the way they would listen to their podcasts. They have a half an hour or an hour long daily commute, and they in the car, they stick on a podcast. There's lots of podcasts even make jokes about the fact that they know everyone is listening in their cars. It was a commonly regarded and considered thing. But of course, then people started working from home. So there is no commute anymore. So there's been a roller coaster as people have seen, some podcasts have seen downloads plummet, some have seen them climb. There's been, people saying like, oh, podcasting is dead now that people don't commute. Some people saying podcasting is bigger than ever because now people are at home. But what we are going to see is a slowly kind of settling of the trends to kind of, as people figure out where this content now fits in their life. Because although you might have a lot of people that aren't necessarily commuting every day because they're working from home, well, if you're working from home, you're not sitting chatting to your co-worker all day. So you might have locked the time that you would have commuted from being a time you listen to podcasts, but you might have unlocked the 8 hours of previous office time to now be podcast time. And you're also going to see people that, again, previously maybe never listened to podcasts, because they were in an office and they're talking to people, now find themselves, oh, I've got 8 hours. I'm sat at the laptop. Normally I'd chat to Kane, who sits next to me all day. We'd have the radio on. Well, now I don't have that. So I'm going to listen to something. So we're going to see some new trends and habits form, like podcasts built around being something people listen to on their lunch because they're not going out with colleagues for lunch. They're not, in the office. They're alone at home, and there's an opportunity for, people who are podcasting to build in and ride some of these trends, be a podcast that is specifically for, lunchtimes, for people to listen to at lunchtimes, like a business podcast that people listen to whilst they're in the middle of their workday, a meditation podcast, or a kind of a detox or chill out podcast that people listen to during their lunchtime, built around the idea of the working day and the fact that they know people are working from home. It's also a kind of chance to remind everyone, those of you that have launched, those of you that haven't launched yet, of just how important consistency is when you're producing your show. And it's the easiest thing to do. And it's the thing we most commonly see people not do, because it's also really easy to just like go like, oh, it doesn't matter if it's Tuesday or Wednesday, as long as there's an episode this week. But when people start to build their kind of routine, humans, we all know this. Every one of you will have some aspect of this in your own life, a routine, a habit, something predictable and consistent that you do. And that's what you build in people's lives when you release your podcast. And I have podcasts that I listen to where I'm like, I know every Monday when I cook dinner, I listen to that podcast. And if there wasn't an episode on that Monday, I'd have a minute of feeling lost.
Yep.
I wouldn't know what to do. But then I go and look for another podcast to listen to. And then next Monday, well, I listen to that podcast again. And the first podcast, it had free real estate. It had parked itself for free on my mind every Monday at dinner time. And by just missing it once, I had to find something else. And then that's taken over. And I just can't overstate the importance of trying to be consistent, because once you build that routine for people and they know, every Tuesday lunch, I go for a jog. Well, not me, maybe Kane. And I listen to such and such a podcast. And once that's built, that's really strong. And it's for free that you've built that by just being consistent. But once you lose it, it's so much harder to get back because someone else has slipped into that spot. Another piece of content has taken that slot from you. So build consistency. And with the new listening habits, there's going to be this kind of shake up of everything and a chance for everyone to kind of reinstill their slot, their little bit of time. So it's a good chance if you've been inconsistent, if you've been a bit flaky, or if you haven't launched yet, to really figure out like when and how are people going to listen and just aggressively stick to that and just own that space. Because I think if you can, there is a huge power to that is easy to get, but really hard. It's easy to get, easy to lose, and then hard to build back once you've lost it.
Yeah, I completely agree. People always laugh at me when I say it ruins my day if one of my favorite shows doesn't release an episode on the day that they're meant to. So I'm the same. So if I'm commuting, chores, gym, shower, like those are the places where I listen to a podcast without fail. And as soon as you open the podcast like early in the morning, about to jump in the car or whatever in the shower, and it's not there, it's ruined, it's thrown off the whole routine. And yeah, it's not ideal. And I completely agree. I would find another one to replace it. And then it is hard. It's worth mentioning though, that even though we say you have to be consistent, it doesn't mean you have to have a weekly show, even though we do recommend it. But it's about managing the expectations of your listener. If you have a seasonal model where you do once a week for 3 months, or if you do a fortnightly show or once a month, like I said, we do recommend a weekly show because most people listening are wanting at least a weekly show to commit to. But if you can't commit to that to start with, try every other week. And we'll be speaking to somebody shortly who's one of our clients who's got tremendous downloads, and he does a fortnightly show. So it's just a case of managing the expectations, training your listeners to go, this is the type of show I'm doing, this is how often I release it. But as soon as you've launched and you've set that, you can't change it. Otherwise, you will see a dip in your downloads, and it is an uphill battle to get back to where you was.
Totally. Awesome. Okay. So hopefully I've instilled how important consistency is for all of you. I'll also say, so this is our quarterly mastermind. You know, for years we did these in person. That was when all of our customers were in the UK and we didn't have a global pandemic. For the last year and a half, we've done them virtually, but, you know, I still try and get them to be interactive. So, you know, for all of you in the chat, you can see each other. Can they see each other's chat, Alex? They can all see the comments, or can only we see those?
The comments are...
Sorry, yes.
Some of them are panelists, and some of them are panelists and attendees.
Okay, cool. So if you're leaving a comment, leave it for attendees as well as panelists so everyone can see it. And if you've got a podcast, shout yourself out, and hopefully a few of you can like collaborate with each other. You can network with each other, because a great part of this used to be would have a networking session and everyone would get together and they'd chat to each other, and they would be able to, get their heads together and come up with ideas and do episodes with each other. So first of all, please do that in the chat. Like if your podcast is live or you're getting ready to launch, do a little bit of promo of yourself in the attendee chat. And hopefully we can get some collaborations between you going. And then secondly, if you haven't already, hopefully you are, but I've been saying this for years and we always find a few people that somehow still aren't, join the Podcast Collective Facebook group, which is the group for everyone who has attended one of our podcast courses or is on our podcast agency. So it's all legit people in there. And it's a place where you've got a chance to speak to each other, ask questions of us, the team, we're in there too. And just a space specifically about podcasting that's, different and a place where you can chat to each other.
It's worth mentioning that James, who will be coming to speak with myself and Aaron shortly, he's really active in the group chat, multiple posts every day. So if you've got any questions, they will be answered. Put it in the chat. Let's try and make an active community where we're helping each other out, collaborating, tips on marketing, monetization, your tech questions, because we do these once a quarter to try and we've got a few hours to fill and we want to tell you everything, all the big changes and stuff. But you don't want to be waiting for once a quarter to get an answer to how to use a bit of kit or, is there a new app that seems to be working, new marketing strategies, whatever. Ask the questions and the whole team and everybody else in the community we're all going to help each other. So yeah, be active, make sure you're in it. I'm sure somebody will put a link in the chat to it shortly.
Awesome. Have we got any questions, Kate? Because I see you have the chat. So I've got 2 more kind of trends to talk about. But firstly, I'll just see if any of you guys have got any questions at this point. No worries if you haven't, but please ping them in and we'll get to all of them. Earlier you can get them in, the better chance they stand of getting answered, because sometimes we get loads.
So what's the best day to post a podcast?
Okay, so this there's not a best singular day. Lots of people there was a kind of common idea that Monday was the best day, as you're kind of like getting people at the start of their week and people would listen to them when they were commuting, etc. There are now enough podcasts that Monday is a very crowded release day, and it's actually easy to get a bit of mind space on Tuesdays or Thursdays or whatever. I would say the days you don't want to post are the weekends. And this goes back to what we were talking about is, humans are creatures of habit and structure. And it's much easier to get a consistent piece of someone's day if it's a Thursday, which is a work day, and I do the same thing every Thursday that I do, every Thursday. Whereas Saturdays and Sundays are generally unstructured days. So Friday evenings, Saturdays and Sundays are less structured. So you can't always guarantee I'm going to be driving to work on a Saturday morning, or that I'm going to be cooking on a Saturday night because I might go out for dinner. So where it comes to the best time to post, definitely a weekday, but any weekday at this point. And it might actually even be better to be in the second half of the week, where as so many podcasts who have followed the conventional wisdom have released in the first half of the week. But any weekday is good. And I would just discourage against the weekends. Like, we're looking for structure, we're looking for consistency, we're looking for predictability. If you release on a Thursday lunchtime and everyone listens in a Thursday evening, that's good, because people are going to do the same thing every Thursday pretty much. Saturdays, Sundays, they're out the window. That's when everyone does all their family things, friend things. So it's much harder to build consistency in a weekend release.
Also worth mentioning, when you're talking about time of day for releasing, when you're using a site like Omny Studio or Anchor, your hosting site, it can take quite a few hours for it to port over to all of the different platforms. So if you're wanting to get to those early birds, the risers, and you want it to be up by 5, 6 a.m., schedule it for midnight. Give it time to port through, because it might come through on Spotify, but not Apple, and you don't want to miss those downloads and things like that. Okay, another question. What platform is more popular for podcasts? Spotify, YouTube? Because some people I know are looking for podcasts on YouTube because they're unfamiliar with Spotify.
Really good question. And this is actually one of the things is actually my next kind of trend. So a really great thing has happened with podcasting, and that is that we have a proper marketplace now. For a very long time, Apple had been a very dominant and very lazy force in podcasting. The app had gone very unupdated. It hadn't been worked on a lot. And most people just listened to it because it was the default app on the iPhone, and loads of people have iPhones. So, like going back, 18 months, 2+ years, nearly every podcast would see consistently 80 plus, 85, 90% plus of all the downloads coming from the Apple podcast app. Google didn't even launch their own podcast app until I think 2018, which is crazy when the iPhone has had a podcast app since 2007. But as audio has been identified as this, gold rush medium, we've seen Spotify, we've seen Google, we've seen Amazon, Facebook, all these others like pour money into growing their market share in the podcasting space. And that is really good because it diversifies the marketplace and actually stabilizes the marketplace, because there's not one single platform that can now decide what the rules are. If you don't like the rules, if you don't like the way the Apple podcast app works, you just go to another app. If you don't like the way the Spotify app works, you go to another app. So firstly, your podcast should be on all of the apps. So if your podcast is set up correctly, if you use a host like Omny Studio and you've correctly connected your RSS feed to the Apple directory, Spotify directory, etc., your podcast will be on all of those platforms, and that should be like the table stakes. you have a secondary question when you come to things like YouTube, which aren't directly connected to an RSS feed. There are some janky ways to do that, and there are some now nicer platforms that allow you to like repurpose an RSS feed into YouTube. There is some interesting contention around YouTube being considered a podcast app, because although it is a video platform, there is some data where people say, up to 30% of all podcasts are actually listened to through YouTube. YouTube is now a very ubiquitous app. It's on everyone's phone. It's on everyone's TVs. It's on, it's on their iPads, and there's lots of evidence. And I do this myself. And, you might find you do this also, where people will put on long form YouTube videos and walk away from them, because there is a lot of content on YouTube that is effectively audio content. There's creators that I watch frequently, but it's just a guy talking with some like stock footage or stock videos, because it's actually audio content. So there's a really strong argument that you should post your content, your audio on YouTube as well, even if you don't have visuals to go with it. And you'll find there are a lot of podcasts that just have, they put their audio on YouTube with just, their artwork or just an episode title as the video element, and they're still getting lots and lots of downloads. Now, not lots and lots of views. Of course, the second step is that you're doing proper video content. And obviously, one of the people who over a very long time has had success with this is Joe Rogan, where, he has always filmed all of his podcasts because he has his own studio, and then they repost that video on YouTube. And then the second step to that is then when you go, okay, actually a 4-hour long conversation is not optimized for YouTube. So what I'll do is I'll cut short segments out of my episode for YouTube that are like singular, like small micro bits of the conversation that are going to be much more friendly to the YouTube algorithm. And that's where we start to get into the kind of repurposing your content and creating, I often try and refer to the podcast as like your hub piece of content. And then off of that, you kind of spoke off all of the other places that you can post by like correctly repurposing. I know Rob and the other guys are going to talk about that more. But yeah, if you can, I would definitely say put your podcast on YouTube as well as all of the other platforms. But if your RSS is set up correctly, your show will all be on Spotify and on Apple and on Overcast and Pocket Cast and Google Podcasts, etc. But it's good that the marketplace is diversified now. Spotify in a very short period of time has got, between 25 and 35% of the overall podcast marketplace, which is awesome, because it means Apple can't just bully everyone into doing what they want to do now. And it means that now all of these different platforms, because it's very easy to forget that the podcasting is open source. You own the relationship with your host and you own your RSS feed. And where people consume your content is just a kind of front-facing app, unlike, say, Facebook, where you put your content in Facebook, and that content is trapped on Facebook unless you actively take it and put it somewhere else. So Facebook isn't actually competing with anyone else, because all the content on Facebook is only on Facebook. But your podcast leaves your host and goes to 10 different apps, and those apps are now competing with the listener for which app the listener is going to use. So there is a much healthier relationship where the apps are encouraged to actually improve user experience, create better tools for the creators, create better features for the users, because there's real competition going on, which is good. So we're going to see Spotify has already done this. Apple has also done this, but bringing in more tools for creators, more features for you to use, and then better things like better discovery. Excuse me 1 second. Remember, the actual unique thing about YouTube, YouTube is a video depository. It's a big list of videos that get presented to you. What makes YouTube great and what makes YouTube a $100 billion company is discoverability. YouTube is great at going, oh, this person watched this stuff, they're probably going to like this stuff. If you're a frequent YouTube user, there is always something good on your home screen to watch, because that is the value of YouTube. Is it's not the content on there, it's that it always knows you good content to watch. So discoverability is going to increase, because all of these apps are going to want to find a way to make sure once you finish listening to one podcast that you're going to listen to another one. And they can do that by presenting you a good next podcast to listen to. The same thing like Netflix does this as well. You know, it has its algorithms to suggest you new stuff to watch. What you don't see at the minute on the Apple Podcast app, is when you finish listening to a podcast, it doesn't go, keep listening and press play for a new one. But Spotify has started doing that, and they're rolling out features for that, because discoverability is mega, mega important, and is what's going to give them an edge. So I've rambled a little bit there, but the fact that there are multiple platforms in the space, the actual different dynamic in the way the kind of platform, the content platform, the creator platform relationship works is much healthier than on Facebook and Instagram, etc. And that's good for both the users and for the creators, because it means the platforms are actually incentivized to look after both of you and create tools for creators and create good experiences for users, which overall improves the experience.
There's a couple of monetary benefits as well from this competitiveness. So like, first of all, let's say sponsorships. If you're across various platforms and it's in the platform's best interest to promote you, because they obviously want users on their show, then your overall downloads will increase. And then obviously you've got sponsorship potential, which in podcasting, you normally get paid a fixed sum per 1,000 downloads. Also, you've got exclusive rights. Obviously, you know, Spotify is throwing cash everywhere for podcasts because of how it is, and it's open feed, and it can go anywhere that accepts an RSS feed. In order for them to get that edge over Apple and YouTube or whatever, they spend a bunch of money to get you to exclusively put content on there, which obviously you don't get on Facebook, because if you're already on Facebook, that content is exclusively Facebook. And anytime you try and do external links or whatever, then it just throttles your reach. So they've sort of got you by the balls, really, whereas there's a lot more earning potential due to sort of the nature of podcasting and how it's set up.
Totally.
Next question. Where are we? What is the best length of an episode to keep the listener engaged?
Okay, so again, conventional wisdom for a long time was kind of 30 to 45 minutes. Humans, we tend to think in like 15-minute chunks. You know, an hour is 4 15-minute chunks. When you watch television, if anyone watches live TV anymore, you know, there's adverts every 15 minutes. Films are traditionally 90 minutes to 2 hours long. You know, we have this weird, I don't know if it's something to do with like, you know, the rhythm of you know, the human mind or something, but we break stuff down into 15 minutes. And, you know, when you're doing stuff, you know, if you're thinking about an hour of your day, you're often thinking about like, oh yeah, that will take me 15 minutes or half an hour. Rarely are we like, that will take me 20 minutes. You just either round up or down. So I always think things are best in multiples of 15. I would try and make episodes 15 minutes at the shortest, because often what happens is people want to be able to put on a piece of content and then passively do something else, because that's what podcasting is great for, is that you can listen to something whilst you're doing something else. And it kind of breaks that experience a little bit if you've got like, say, 5-minute long episodes, because you're like, okay, great, I'll stick on this podcast. I'm going to start doing my, you know, cooking. And then after 5 minutes, you're like, oh, I've got to pick something else now. It can be different if you've got like an auto playing feed or something. And there are some podcasts that are really good at this. There's Marketing School that do just like a 3-minute episode every day. That's just a single marketing tip. There's always stuff that breaks the rule, but I still personally think from all of the podcasts, you know, I'm in a privileged position that I can see the back end and the analytics of like over 100 podcasts, and the sweet spot for kind of consumption I see. And when I say consumption, I mean like of whatever length of audio you've got, how much people actually listen to is between the 15 and 25-minute mark, which, you know, tallies nicely with like 15 to 30 minutes, 2 chunks of 15, 1 to 2 chunks of 15. You know, the kind of the rule that someone else might give you is like, oh, your content will be as long as it needs to be, which is not necessarily actually like meaningful advice. It's important that, like with your release schedule, your length is also consistent as much as it can be, because when you're building a piece of routine in someone's life, they're also creating an expectation of that. Again, if I'm cooking every Monday with Kane's podcast, and 1 week it's 5 minutes and the next week it's 2.5 hours, that's really hard for me to plan in my routine, because 1 week it's done before I finish the pasta, and the next week I didn't get to finish it before I finished cooking, and then I never listened to the second half because I've moved on to Tuesday by then. So consistency in length is as important as consistency in release. And I personally think 15 to 30 minutes is a really, really great place to start. You don't want to have to pad your content, and you don't want to have to, have content that's so short that people are like, oh, what? It's over. And if you produce a great hour-long piece of content, make it 2 episodes. Like there's no reason to not do that if it means you're going to get higher consumption, because you don't want everyone listening to the first 15 minutes of every episode and then trailing off because it's just too long. People can be intimidated by long run times. How many times have you clicked onto a video on Facebook, seen that it's 5 minutes long, and actually just quit off at that point because you're like, I'm not going to sit and watch a Facebook video for 5 minutes. So you don't even watch 30 seconds of it. You just go, you leave it straight away. Whereas if it was 1 minute long and then the next video in the playlist was the second minute, you might end up watching the whole thing. But sometimes runtime in itself can be an intimidating factor in like kind of user behavior. So for me, 15 to 20 minutes, if your content fits it well. I'm actually a proponent of breaking up episodes if they need to be broken up to keep your episode length consistent. And I think, you should make sure that you're editorializing yourself. A lot of people, they record and they go, cool, because I've recorded content, there's like an inherent value to that. And therefore, it has value because I've made it. But be brutal, be like, cool, I talked for an hour, maybe 10 minutes of that was great, and you shouldn't be scared to chuck away stuff. And I can tell you, even Rob, who we work with, he records a lot more than we publish because we have, quality, and he gives editorial control over. And sometimes we cut significant things, or we even have episodes that we've never published because we weren't comfortable with the quality. And if Rob is happy to do that, a man who's obsessed with leveraging every second of his time, you should be comfortable with that as well. And making sure that the quality of the content you're putting out is as high as it can be, and that it's consistently high, and that, you're not stretching, or you're not going, oh, well, me and my friend had a chat for 2.5 hours, so I'll publish a 2.5 hour episode. No, like find the 30 minutes in that were fucking awesome and publish those. And it's a bit more legwork, but it's far better to have 30 minutes that is actually listened to than 2.5 hours that everyone tunes out of after 10 minutes because, they couldn't find the good content.
Completely agree with that. It's also worth mentioning as well that it depends on what type of content you do. So if you're doing an interview show, then that's obviously going to be dramatically longer than if you're doing just a solo bit of content. Bringing up marketing school again, they do one actionable marketing tip per day, and there's no sort of fluff. It's just in and out. I want you to learn something quickly. But if you want to do an interview with somebody and they've got a lot to say, then obviously that's not going to be 15 minutes. That will be your 45 minutes. So it does kind of depend on what your content is. Completely agree. I would rather the camera run for 2 hours and you just pick the best bits and pick something that's really, really high quality. This is a really good question. So should podcasts be pre-recorded or can they be repurposed from a live? What works best, do you think?
So it's always going to be better if you are sitting down to record a podcast. Now, it doesn't mean you can't repurpose other content into podcasting, but from my years of experience, intention is important. And if you sit down to go, I'm going to record a podcast episode, I've got my notes or I've got my guest, and we are here to make a great podcast, that will be better than cutting that out of a longer conversation that you've done for something else. Now, we want to be efficient, we want to be optimized, so you can do that. And, Rob has done this in the past, and we work with hosts that do this now. But if you're simply asking me what's better, the answer is it's always better to just do the thing. It's better if you didn't repurpose anything and that you made specific YouTube videos and specific TikTok videos and specific, Facebook videos. But, reality doesn't always allow that. So the best is always, if you can, produce everything specifically for the platform that's going on. But if it doesn't, you need to make sure you've got like the right mindset to be able to switch your kind of focus from the different thing you're on, and also then have foresight to, okay, if I'm going to repurpose this to become a podcast, and I'm doing say me and Kane are doing a Facebook Live, or let's say we're doing this mastermind right now, and I want to say, okay, we're going to take my 4 trends and we're going to turn that into a podcast episode for our podcast. I want to think about that carefully and understand, like, okay, cool. I need to, in an ideal world, I want to have, okay, I'm going to do a bunch of intro stuff where I'm going to address the audience. And then I'm basically going to mentally switch to the point where I'm now treating this as a podcast. And in that moment, I'm going to ignore the audience and I'm going to do great content for 30 minutes with Kane. And then I'll pause and then I'll take your questions. And as close as possible, I've got the experience of both. What becomes very hard is when people want to do like live content. Let's say they're doing a Facebook Live or an Instagram Live or something. And then constantly they're like answering questions or addressing the audience. And they're like, oh yeah, just seen, Steve said, Steve's left a like, thanks for that, Steve. Oh, I can see Roger in the audience. Great to see you, Roger. Like, and you're mid-flow interrupting yourself. Like, that makes it really hard to then turn that into a great piece of content that actually sounds like you wanted it to be a podcast and not just something else that has just been slapped onto your podcast feed. So you can do it, but think with intention and plan with intention, and try and segment your time up correctly, because you can do it and you can do it well, but you just have to think about it, and you have to then mentally switch your mode from, I'm speaking with the audience, I'm talking to the audience, to I'm now delivering my content. And then you go, cool, great, pause, a nice cut for someone to cut. And now I'm going to take my audience questions. And you can get best of both, but you'll never get a perfect experience because your audience are going to want to interact with you in those 40 minutes or 30 minutes. And Rob himself has admitted there are times when he's tried to do too many things at once. And it definitely is a talent. And I think if it's something you haven't done before, it's best to start doing just one thing at a time and then slowly stack them up, and kind of, cut your teeth and learn that over time as well, because it can be confusing, it can be challenging. Rob tried to do a StreamYard, a Clubhouse, a podcast interview, and like an Instagram Live, like simultaneously, and he will tell you it was like a fucking mess. Like, no one had any idea what was going on because he's distracted looking at 5 different things to try and read the comments. He's not then paying attention to the guest. The guest has turned his mic on Clubhouse, but then has forgot to turn it on. So it's like it was not not great in the way it could be. What will keep people coming back to you is the quality of your content. So quality of the content always has to come above convenience for you. If you can over time build in more and more convenience for you, so you can be more and more prolific, that's awesome. But sanctity of the content is a top, because you've got to remember, if you have a brand new listener listen to your podcast for the first time, they're like, wow, this guy sounds great, I'm hyped for his content, and they come and listen to your podcast and you sound distracted and you're doing other stuff, they're going to bounce, and you've lost a potential listener that could become a potential customer or whatever. So every podcast could be the first podcast someone listens to, and you need to think about it in that sense.
I think it's important what you touched on. In an ideal world, yes, every single bit of content you do is unique. It's highly edited. It's really polished. Your 2 Facebook Lives a day, your Instagram, your podcast, your YouTube, your Shorts, TikTok, etc. But it's not really the world we live in. So even if you wanted to do one master bit of content, and this is mostly what Rob does, is let me do my long form podcast, and that gets chopped up into Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all of that. That still takes a full-time person to just transform a long form bit of content into shorter, well-edited pieces. And that is all day, 5 days a week minimum. So if you was to even consider doing that amount of content, but it all be unique and all be the high standard that you're talking about, it would just be impossible. There's not enough hours in the day. So even though, yes, unique content is the best, ideal, it's just not possible. So I would really suggest that in the question, you say, can you take lives? Yes, you can, if you need some extra content. So let's say you're doing 2 podcasts per week, and you just don't have time to do a second one. Well, then go back to one of your old Facebook lives, take it, polish it up, make it sound and look a bit better, upload that as a podcast. But in an ideal world, what you should all be aiming for is spend all of your time and effort making the perfect piece of podcast content. Perfect length, sounds great, it flows well, can be edited, etc. And then that can be all of your other bits of content. So rather than going from social media to podcast, you're going from podcast to social media to YouTube, etc. So do you want to return to your list, Tom?
Yes. So I have my final trend, which is a great trend because it's about how you make money from podcasting. Cool. So what we're finally seeing, and this is actually a weirdly late coming trend to podcasting, and in some ways actually the Western world, but that is listener supported podcasts. And by that I mean your listeners paying you either for premium content, behind the scenes content, some kind of paywalled or gated content, live shows, merchandise, discounts, all of these things, but you using your audience as your source of income rather than relying on advertisers, and having effectively yourself, who's a content creator, an audience that loves you, and then having like a middleman of a sponsor or an advertiser needed to actually make you any money. So we've seen Apple launch to kind of some success. They had a lot of technical problems in their first month. A platform built into Apple Podcasts that allows people to have sell subscriptions. So people can now directly through Apple Podcasts subscribe a paid subscription to your podcast. And for that, they unlock effectively like a premium private feed where you can put other content. So it might be early episode, it might be early release of future episodes. It might be behind the scenes stuff. It might be completely separate episodes. It might even just be stuff from, that's you only ever maybe say have 100 episodes, your 100 most recent episodes in your feed. And if people want to access older stuff, then they pay that premium for. But this is really, really great because it unlocks like a plethora of new ways for podcasters to be able to actually monetize their content. And big people, and we're starting to see some really big notable podcasters do this, which kind of sets the tone and normalizes this. In China, they have, a huge internal network of creators. Thank you, Ben. And the majority of them use premium content as the way to monetize. And they sell it up to 75% of people that listen to podcasts in China pay at least one subscription, which is incredible. That's in the US, that'd be hundreds of millions of people. And we're seeing this trend everywhere, people pay, Substack, which exists where, journalists are leaving newspapers and setting up their own monthly newsletters, and people want to pay for the content they want rather than paying big media companies to provide them a bunch of content. So this is really, really great. It creates more opportunities for podcasters. You can monetize it earlier with less people and you can get more value out of them. You have more control over that relationship. And lastly, it means that actually, because you no longer need advertisers, it's actually going to drive the cost of ads up, which is good for podcasters because there'll be lots of shows that will now opt out of using ads. And that compounds with the fact that there is a big influx of people wanting to use podcast ads because platforms like Facebook have made it much harder in the last few months. So you're going to see it easier to make money off your audience, but also easier to make money off sponsors and advertisers as the ad rates go up. So that's the last big trend that we're going to see, and that's going to grow as well. So yeah, I can see we've got David on the line now. Thank you for lining that up, Ben. So I'm going to sign off now. I'm going to leave you with Kane, who's going to speak to David, who's one of our wonderful podcast clients. He's done phenomenally over the last few years. He's got some great results, and Kane's going to speak to him, and hopefully you'll all be able to learn something from David's success. After that, we'll have Aaron, our senior producer, and James joining us to talk about some more of the technical content. And then finally, Rob about how he built his little media empire. But for now, I'll be signing off. I'll be around, but not on screen. If anyone has any more questions, if there's anything specific for me, like at me in the chat, and then I can always come back on later to answer your questions. But otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. Kate, enjoy your interview. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Hi, David. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Can you hear me okay, Kane?
Yeah, not too bad. Can you turn it up a little bit?
Is that better?
There.
How's that?
Yeah, perfect. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Very good. Thank you.
Good. So, David, 2 years in, almost 200,000 downloads. How does that feel?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. It's considering where I was 2 years ago. I was on your masterclass. I think the first workshop, and this would have been beyond my wildest dreams back then. But no, it feels good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, take us back to before then. How come you decided to go on the masterclass? What was sort of going on in your head thinking? Why did you want to start a podcast? What was the reasons behind it?
Sure. So I work for a learning technology company. So Ed's Tech, is the genre, and we'd just got a business advisor who had been on your progressive podcast workshop himself, and he was building quite a following on the podcast, and because it was working so well for him, said that we should do the same. So that was the rationale. And at that point, I must say, I think we started the conversations in about February, March 2019. I was a big fan of podcasts at the time. I never really considered myself a podcast host. So I would say that I was a little bit excited, but more reluctant. And stepping out to the unknown would have been quite a thing. But the whole idea is that I was writing a lot of long form articles that were getting decent engagement on LinkedIn, and so it was seen as another opportunity to engage a wider audience in the kind of conversation that we wanted to be in and around.
Oh, amazing! And it's clearly paid off, which is always nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But the main reason why we wanted to speak to you, David, as sort of a brilliant example of what people can achieve is, first of all, it's not like you came from like a huge background before. It's not like you had 500,000 followers or anything like that. But also, you're one of the rare people that are able to do a fortnightly show and still get tremendous downloads. So talk us through, first of all, why you chose to do fortnightly, and what is it that you're doing sort of on the marketing side outside of just putting out content, you think's responsible for your great download numbers?
So first of all, I started off weekly, so as I mentioned before, I was writing long form articles that were getting decent engagement, and I was I was building up a bit of a following on LinkedIn anyway. But when I started posting that I was starting a podcast, and especially because I think the first 6 or so, I was actually going to a studio in London, and it looked pretty grand, and I was sharing pictures of this online. That generated some interest on the recommendation of Rob and you guys on the workshop. I built up a bank of 6 episodes, so I could build up quite the anticipation over a month or so when I was going to the studio saying I was going to do the podcast. So that really helped, and it got really good engagement. I think that a tip that I'd found out is on LinkedIn, when you post about something for the first time, it gets decent engagement. So I always say to people, write a post saying, this is my first post, or I'm about to do my first podcast. There's just something about that gets some decent interest. So I'd say that I was capitalizing on a following that I built up anyway over time. But it's not like I was any kind of celeb, it's just grunt work. It just takes there was the long form articles, there was the everybody will know who's on LinkedIn, there are the longer or the shorter status posts where you'd say something slightly provocative in order to generate a conversation, and then there was the podcast. So it was those in tandem. In my sector. I wouldn't say Twitter was particularly useful. In some, you go where your audience is, but LinkedIn is where my audience is. So that's how we've done that. And then it's about consistency. So I posted for I recorded a weekly show for a year. I posted about it on LinkedIn. I think there was good social proof. I would be tagging the people that I had on as guests on the podcast as well. So that increased the audience that it would go to. And then the reason I decided to go fortnightly was that it was becoming a full-time job, and I run a business. So it is just a way of me conversing with guests for the benefit of my intended customer. But I know there was one other thing. One other reason is that one comment that I kept on getting every time I posted about a new episode was people telling me that they hadn't caught up on previous episodes yet. So that was my audience telling me that they were loving the content, but they weren't keeping up. And so my fear was that I was having all these great conversations, but then they were going to pick and choose which ones to listen to based on their needs rather than listening to all of them, which was in my best interests as far as the ultimate aim of the podcast, which was to buy my tech.
Yeah, nice. No, and it's good. So crowdsourcing is really important when it comes to podcasting. So whether it's what content should I do? Who should I interview? All of those things is really important to ask for their feedback. So there's a couple of things that you touched on there that I'd like to go over just for the benefit of everyone in the audience. So when David refers to the 6 episodes, what we do as part of our launch is record a bank of episodes. So first of all, on launch day, you'll release 6 episodes. So when somebody comes to see you, if they stumble upon it, it looks like it's a bit more of an established show. Tom mentioned earlier about how podcasting is quite private, where you don't see downloads and things. But one thing that people may judge you on is how many episodes you've got. So release a bunch of them. And also you've got a backlog in case, you're busy running a business. So if you miss a week recording, at least we've got some to upload. So how's the podcast benefited your business?
So the idea was that it would just be top of funnel. So it's about guiding the conversation to the topics that we want to happen. So our tech is pretty disruptive, which means that we're going to have a certain type of radical buyer. They're going to be a bit of a rebel themselves. They want to break from the mainstream to do something different. So we wanted to normalize this progressive practice. So the idea was to have these conversations. So everybody, so all my guests are talking about using data. They're talking about a different type of consulting approach and being held accountable for real results. Whereas in learning, it's just usually create some e-learning and hope people go to the platform. I mean, it's the two are chalk and cheese, but the traditional approach, which doesn't work, is the predominant approach in learning and development. So we needed to change that conversation. So with all the guests I had on, they were all talking about doing things differently and getting great results. So I've been told since that I'm normalizing progressive practice. Listeners are then thinking, oh my God, like I'm behind the curve here. I need to do something. So I speak to people all the time. And I spoke to somebody earlier this morning who said to me that they changed their approach because of what I'd said on the podcast. I hear this a lot. People listen to the podcast, they change their approach. Our tech facilitates this change of approach, and then we get the business. So where it was meant to be top of funnel to change the conversation, we've had actually people book demos and actually buy the tech. So it's more middle to bottom of the funnel. This has been a listen to the podcast over a period of time, become convinced. There's some kind of brand loyalty towards the podcast and the tech, and then people jump on board. There were certain things that I did that mean that this is the main podcast in my space now. There's number one, Rob says on the course, it's be careful what you name it. SEO needs you to own the phrases in your niche, as it were. So I looked up, see whether there was the Learning and Development Podcast. Hey, it was available. So I had the Learning and Development Podcast, which when people are looking up, on their podcast app, Learning and Development, mine pops right up. It's, I thought myself, and there are plenty of people in my niche who have been a bit too clever about it. They've called it something whizzy, or they've called it their brand, but you just own it. Just own your phrases, or what it's called. So there's that. And the fact that it is truly credible. You know, we're not pushing anything, we're not selling anything. We are just challenging the profession to expect and achieve more. And my guests then come on, they talk about their experience of that, but it's not a sellout. The listener comes on and they know that they will be challenged and inspired, and they'll be given a little bit of a roadmap, but they won't be sold to. It really is. It's quite a Trojan horse, and you know, we really are number one, not just in terms of numbers, but on polls and charts. You know, people. It's either something that might be formally put together and published, or people just writing their top 5 podcasts for learning and development. And if I'm not number one, I'm certainly right up there in the conversation, because that was the aim, you know, what we called it, and how we've run it.
Yeah, it couldn't be more on the nose if you tried. But that's good, because before we went live, I did give it a Google just to see how strong it was. And even if you Google it, Learning and Development Podcast, L&D Podcast, not only does Apple Podcasts come up with the link to your show, your website comes up. Mm-hmm. So we do find a lot of people do try and be too clever with it. But at the end of the day, that will be amusing to those that are well versed in your sort of niche. But those that are trying to discover your show, it's not ideal. And I liked what you mentioned earlier about how a lot of your time is spent on LinkedIn, because that's obviously where your audience is trying to be, or is. That's something that we try to instill in everybody that we speak to is it's not just good enough to like post on Facebook to your mum and your cousins, oh, I've got a new podcast out. It's about being in front of your ideal listener and, you know, trying to get them for their input. And it's good for clearly very good for business. I think what we call trickle down revenue, which is what you're sort of alluding to, is the most overlooked monetization method for podcasts. And if you're not sort of hot on it and looking where that business is coming from, you might miss the fact that your highest paying customers might have been listening to your podcast for the last 6 months. And I like your approach of not selling. It's just, let me give you as much value as possible, believing in your service and product, and know that if they're in the market, they will choose yours, because you own part of their headspace. You're the go-to guy now, because they feel a connection to you.
And I'd say there as well, Kane, is again, Rob talks about it on the workshop or the masterclass. Be really clear why you're doing the podcast. Like, if you're not clear, then you could just get lost. We were really clear at the outset. It was top of funnel, guiding the conversation, and we get guests in who validate our approach every other week. It's just bang, bang, bang. It's consistency. You know what you're getting, and booking demos and getting business was what we were after. So it doesn't matter. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm pushing 200,000 downloads, but if it wasn't delivering demos and business, then it's not achieving anything. And when, you know, a great proportion of my time is spent on finding guests, on preparing questions, on having the conversations, doing the admin, and all of, and then pushing it on social media. Plus, I get invited to not just to do this, but on, you know, other things, talk about the podcast. I'm really clear. I always think, is this going to deliver for me and what I am trying to achieve? If not, you could get lost in this, because, you know, and end up, it could be a time zap for very little return. So I'd say be really clear why you're doing it, because you might need to adjust. It might be the right thing, but you might need to adapt your approach, but you won't know unless you're clear.
Very true. And not everybody on this mastermind is part of our agency like you are. So that could be even more time potentially wasted, you know, with the editing and syndicating, all the boring stuff that we take care of for you. But it's a very valid point. So one thing, mostly because of how successful you've been with your podcast, I think a lot of people would benefit from is, what are some of the things that you've challenged, that have been the biggest challenge, or potentially you might say that you failed at, and how did you overcome them? What advice would you give to those people that are facing the same things?
Let's have a think. look, I'm not bragging. I've had it quite plain sailing, if I'm honest. I think that that I was in early enough. Like, I was only 2 years ago, but before a plethora of other podcasts. I mean, really is awash with them right now. So I would say to anyone, you do it. Like, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it now. If you wait 6 months, there are going to be another, goodness knows how many podcasts in your niche. So there really isn't any time like the present. So if I say things that I know that have worked for me, is the prep behind it. I've been invited onto podcasts where the host says, I'll just ask some questions and we'll see how it goes. And you're going, where is this going? Seriously. I wonder where the value is. I always write 10 questions down, and I send them to the person that I'm going to be interviewing. That provides me with enough comfort that I've got an hour's worth of, 40 minutes worth of material a lot of the time. They know the direction that it's going. And I know that if I get those answers, that's going to have served me really well. So preparation's everything. It probably takes me maybe half an hour to make sure that I've nailed those, but I wouldn't go into a podcast without it now. I think that being a podcast fan has really helped, because right from the outset I knew that, and no offense, because people have got their own approaches, me talking for half an hour, 40 minutes wouldn't be something I'd listen to. And it doesn't matter what I was talking about either. I think the value of podcasts is that you are listening in on a conversation between people who know what they're talking about, or they're passionate enough about what they're talking about, or it's particularly topical or relevant to something you're interested in, or something that's happening right now. So I always say to people, become a big fan of podcasts and then really zero in on what you enjoy most. Don't go creating something that you've never heard before, or perhaps you wouldn't listen to yourself, because the chances are that no one else is going to listen either. And I do believe that podcast formats are they're done. I mean, it's pretty much fixed in. So I went with the one guest thing. You go with one guest because you've only got to book one person. I've done panels, and they, whilst they are good, they add to the administration like you wouldn't believe, like trying to bring people together, and then the stress of, is everyone going to show up? I've done live podcasts as well, where trying to broaden the audience, where it's just over Zoom, invite 3 people on and chat, strip the audio out, and then create it again. So being creative in trying to have a different type of engagement. The idea, first of all, with that was that I was going to do something live and in person, and we found a venue in London, and then of course COVID hit, and then we thought, well, why don't we just open it up? The world will be ready for something virtual, and we had 200 people sign up. And then I thought, well, we were about to hire a place like that had room for 30 people above a pub in London, and now we've got 200 people signed up. So again, you be creative with it. But I would say don't misjudge what people expect from you. If you are on iTunes or Spotify, people will expect that it will be a professionally sounding podcast. Do your music, do your intro, make sure that your sound quality, at least your sound quality, is, as you guys would say, around about 7 or 8 out of 10. You don't need to get 10 out of 10. People can't discern the difference between an 8 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, but they can discern the difference between a 5 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10, which they may expect. Do your outro. Do your make sure that when they look at your episode details, it looks professionally done. Don't let that be a blocker, because it doesn't take that much time, but expect that of yourself, that you will own your space, because you're in their phone, on their app, and they expect it.
No, 100%. It's really good advice. I know a lot of people start it as a bit of a passion project. I think it's important to create content that you want to listen to. I know there's loads of successful podcasters that have gone, this wasn't there, so I did it, and now I'm doing really well, which I'm sure is probably a similar case to yourself. it seems to be what you're touching on a lot is do everything with intention and do it properly. Don't half-ass anything.
Yep.
So with that, have you got anything lined up for the future? Are you doing more live events? Have you got any monetization strategies? What's in the future for your podcast?
So I've got no live events booked up at the moment. It's just consistency at the moment. And as far as monetizing, with the business that I've gained directly from the podcast, it's paid for itself multiple times. It's doing exactly what we want it to do. It's opened up new markets. Only half of my audience is in the UK. A quarter of it is in the US. So another huge market that we're breaking into, and we've already got subscribers. So the podcast is already doing the work that we need it to. So no, like we've got no plans to monetize. I definitely see us doing more live stuff because I think it opens it up. I suppose quite close to it. I've I am doing something that's had the door opened by the podcast. Is somebody in the US with a huge following has asked me to do a 6-part series with him on, with guests. So it's the similar format, and yeah. I didn't put the two together. So yeah, we're doing them every other week in September through to the middle of December with different guests that we're lining up. So yeah, because a big thing for my business right now is we're looking to capitalize on much of the interest that we've got in the US by being more intentional and growing an office out of there. And this was part of that to grow the audience. But see how easy it is just not to associate my normal podcast stuff with what's coming up, because it just seems so natural, and it's just and that's what the podcast does. It opens you up to a new audience because you're regular with it, and because it's credible, and because people enjoy it. Come knocking on your door for more opportunities. So the immediate answer was no, but of course the actual answer is yes.
Yeah, see, that's what I said about the trickle down revenues, where you've really got to sort of pay attention to these things, because you think, oh, it's because I'm really good at my business, but and you may be, but a lot of the time it's the podcast where people find you. And no, it's brilliant. Congratulations on the doors being opened. I know we've had a few of our clients that have had all sorts of opportunities, that voiceover works for like Audible, or like they're talking on stage for various like keynotes and things, purely because somebody's heard them on a podcast. You go, you've got a good voice, or you sound good, and things like that. And it opens a lot of opportunities that people don't really register. And it's just a case of, you can't necessarily plan those opportunities when you start. It's just a case of starting, and things go quite well, which again seems to be happening for you. So tell me, you were talking earlier about on LinkedIn, you'll tag guests and things like that. Do you do anything else? Do you give guests like any assets? Do you try and go on other shows? Like, how do you leverage other people to try and expand your audience?
Yeah, so I'm invited onto quite a lot of other shows, again, because I've been around 2 years. People who are just starting up their podcast. So I've been the first guest on many podcasts where they've seen an opportunity to get an immediate audience, get my audience, perhaps. And I always enjoy that. I think that the more channels I could be on, and especially if I'm not doing the admin, it is just 45 minutes of my time, and so I'll always take that up. But Kane, I don't mind it not being fair. I don't always invite them back on mine, because I don't believe that my audience should just be subjected to 2 podcast hosts talking about how fun podcasts are. I think that I'd lose podcast members. I try to maintain the integrity of mine. My audience is learning and development, not podcasts, and they want to hear learning and development people who are doing things the way that we talk about it. So yes, I do get plenty. I probably do about 2 guest slots a month, which I think is pretty good, because that is just someone else's channel, somebody else's audience. What I love about podcasts is, as a consumer myself, and that I've found, is that they last a long time, a lot longer than blog posts do. So I might be contacted a year after I'm on somebody else's podcast who's 20 episodes in, and then but their listener has gone right back to the beginning and then heard mine. So it's so I linger around quite a lot. So I jump at the opportunity. And today I was approached to be on a LinkedIn podcast. So of course I snapped their arm off for that. And I'll look forward to whatever that delivers.
Yeah, it's if you can be the first episode, that's always
Mm.
sort of golden, because you're right. Podcasts have got such a long tail, and 9 times out of 10, someone's first ever show will always be their most listened to.
Yeah.
Normally, someone will listen to their first one, see what it's about, and then they'll catch up to episode number 80 or whatever you're on, and sort of see where you're at now. So I always recommend to all of our clients that if you've got the time, or just actually make the time, go on as many people's shows as you can, because it's free marketing, and podcasters are so collaborative. It's not like maybe there's somebody on LinkedIn that's sort of in the same niche as your business and you're probably enemies, because it's like, this is my scroll time. I want people to interact with my posts. With podcasts, it's very different. If you're in the same niche, then great, go on each other's. But I like the fact that you don't dilute your show, because it doesn't always have to be tit for tat, because at the end of the day, you're doing them a favor if they're a new show. And then you're obviously getting that long benefit as well. Okay, so listen, I've got one final question for you. What is your sort of golden piece of advice for everyone in here that hasn't started yet? What would you say is the most important thing about having a successful podcast?
I don't think I could just distill it down to one. It would be get obsessed by podcasts as a listener. Choose the format you most enjoy. Prepare in advance. So if if you're doing it on your own, make sure you know what you're talking about. If you've got a guest, make sure that you've planned all your questions, and be as professional as you possibly can in its execution, both with the sound and the administration, because it can really deliver for you. And apologies for that noise there. I've got my window cleaners just turned up, so talking about professionalism.
No, not to worry. No, listen, David, thank you very, very much for joining us. I will let you get on with your business and paying your window cleaner, and we'll catch up with you very soon.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kane.
All right, thanks.
Speak soon. Bye.
Speak soon. Okay, so for everybody else, we're going to take a very short break, and then Aaron and James will come join me, and we'll talk all about how to repurpose your content with intent, how to do it properly, how to leverage your time, and continue answering everyone's questions. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So I am now here with Aaron and James. We're going to be discussing all things content repurposing, how to sort of maximize your time, create the best possible content, and how to get the most downloads and leverage. So if I know most people already know Aaron, but Aaron, if you want to quickly introduce yourself, and then James do the same.
Certainly. So obviously those who already know, we do an agency for all things podcast related at Progressive. I manhandle all of that stuff, onboarding, production, producing. I talk at like events like this, for example, but we also do like editing and anything to do with marketing, all of that stuff. I've got the rest of the team with me, which like Kane as well, Tom, and then interact with Rob and Rob's podcast and things like that. Obviously, we've got some new people on the team as well recently, such as Jamie. We're doing lots of repurposing, just taking what we learned and what we do with Rob and just moving that on to helping other people do the same thing, basically. So that's what I do.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm new to the team, relatively new to the team. I'm an editor. I edit video, audio, and video. You'll probably see me on the Podcast Collective Facebook group. If you're just seeing a random dude with pink hair posting stuff, that's me. I am part of the team. I'm not just a random guy who's hijacked the page for my own nefarious reasons. So yeah, if you are a client with us or you are on part of that Podcasting Collective group, you'll do a fair bit of interacting with me.
Yeah. On that note, obviously, we're doing a big push at the minute. You probably noticed putting more stuff in there, relevant stuff to podcasting, video, audio, whatever, technical help, marketing, anything that we find and we think that's really useful, putting it straight into there. Usually I'm going to get like Jamie or someone else to put it in there, but that's what we're doing there. But obviously, hopefully, you guys will start using that resource, but also putting your own stuff in there as well. You've got questions and things like that, like Jamie, Malika, myself, Kane, Tom, we'll all pick up on those and answer those questions. But that's what we're here to do right now, is it not? Questions?
Yeah,
questions?
absolutely. So we'll put the link to the Facebook Collective in just a second for those that aren't in it just yet, and then you will all be accepted later on today.
Need to request and we'll accept, yeah.
Absolutely. So there's a few questions that have been in the WhatsApp group chat and the Facebook. So we'll go through those, and if you've got any more, please just add them into this chat and we will definitely get to them. Okay, so this is quite an important one, and I think this is one that people misunderstand.
Mm-hmm.
So, gentlemen, what size audience do I have to have before I launch my podcast?
So what size? Obviously reading this question, my answer to that question would be one. You only need one person to be listening to you to justify it. It depends what the means in the end of the podcast is. But it's better to start doing it and find that audience than wait until you have an audience, because obviously if you're not producing any content, you're not going to have any audience. It's chicken and egg.
Yep.
I would just say just go for it. You can start put your feelers out there by going on other podcasts, other channels, other like content like YouTube or Facebook, Instagram, those things, and find an audience. It might actually probably be better to do it that way anyway, because then you might realize actually doing it certain other ways as opposed to the way that you think would work, and you shortcut your way basically to the better way of doing it, rather than doing a bunch of stuff, launching it and realizing actually I should have maybe done that way first. Yeah. So one person. Yeah, you only need one person.
Yeah, completely agree. Podcasting is an ideal for medium to build your brand and your following. So it's very much chicken and egg. Don't wait to get started. And as David mentioned when I was just speaking to him, it's a case that he just got started. Yes, he may have had some LinkedIn followers, but the majority of his business and all of his leads have come from his podcast, and that's helped him grow his other platforms as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Again, you don't need millions of people following you. If you're like David, for example, is a good example where he's using the podcast as a tool, is brand building for himself, but also reaching out to new audiences, because within those audiences, our listeners could also potentially be clients, because they're looking for the same answers that he's giving on the podcast. And you don't need to find hundreds of those people, thousands of people. You only have to find maybe 10 of them. And if just one of those 10 ends up paying,
yeah,
you make money. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's get some of these technical questions.
Yep.
Let's go with, how do I come up with episode ideas? Let's get into the nitty gritty of actually creating
podcast episode ideas.
Podcast episode ideas.
Or video or whatever. So the way that I always answer this, an example like David, for example, in his business, what he's doing is he's answering questions all the time. He's helping people. And I always give another example, which is, what are the 3 most common questions you get asked, right? So if I said that to you, Kane, I'm sure it could be how do I get more listeners? How do I get more downloads? Or how do I actually start? And then you just form content questions around those 3 questions, and you'll just be forever answering those 3 questions. The reason being, new listeners will always be looking for those like sort of like basic primordial answers. And again, whether that's your podcast is about, I don't know, football, coaching, dentistry, podcast about podcasts, business, any of those things, you know, it's the same again. You'll have like the same things that people are always looking for answers for. You know, if it's business, like how do I better marketing, how do I make more money? How do I do like generate better leads? And then you just sort of like branch out from that question to relevance. You know, again, like I know Tom does a big slot on this when we do the PMM as well. But something he refers to as newsjacking, which is like what is relevant in my industry right now in the news. I just BBC News, right? Go on there, have a look, CNN, whatever. Like I was saying, we're dumping stuff into content into the podcast collective. We're sifting through stuff that's coming through. That's relevant to our listeners. That's relevant to our hosts that are in the podcast collective. So all we need to do is just basically we filter that, we present that content to them. It's the same logic there. If we did a podcast, we would do episodes on that content that we're dropping in there. And all I'm doing is just reading stuff I was already reading, or I'm keeping up to date. So, you know, if you do property podcast, you know, a couple of years ago when they did the Section 21, you know, some of our shows they were just doing episodes based on that when things were changing, because people want to know that, yeah, cool, that's how they explain it. That's confusing. Can someone give me like a layman's guide on what that means, whether that's like, you know, changes to COVID guidelines and, you know, and how that affects, say, like gyms, for example, you know, coaching businesses, or how it affects lots of other things. So that's newsjacking is definitely an easy one. Just like what's relevant in the news and how can I like make that interesting for my listeners? You know, those are sort of the 2 easy.
So newsjacking and FAQs essentially.
Yeah,
Jamie?
yeah.
Well, again, yeah, I guess it can come under newsjacking. Is some people get kind of recoil at the thought of this, but don't be afraid to chase trends, right? Because they're trends for a reason. So I always say what's always a good thing to use is actually just something as simple as Google Keyword Planner tool. Take a topic that's trending at the moment and think, how can I apply this to the niche that I'm in? How can I expand off this and incorporate into something in my niche? Because the thing is with making a podcast idea, right, is you can just take one real simple basic idea and you can talk about that for half an hour, because it's always so you can just take a keyword. Obviously, I'm assuming people watching this are kind of running businesses, so you know, look for something with like low competition but high-ish search numbers.
That's through like Google AdWords, right? So
so
go to Google, search Google AdWords, and
Google AdWords Keyword Planners is the best one of 3. You can obviously you can get paid for tools like TubeBuddy, but the Google one is the best.
Always try free first.
So that's a great way to do it, and that's also a great way to get kind of SEO rich keywords for your titles, so you get those nice clickable titles. And in the show note description as well. So
I'll say exactly what we're doing now, which is crowdsourcing.
Yep.
So these are all questions from our Facebook group, our WhatsApps, commonly asked questions. So let's just ask your audience. So again, let me go back to what David was saying. He spends a lot of time in LinkedIn because that's where his audience is.
Yep.
If that's where his ideal listener is, go to those platforms. So whether that's LinkedIn, it's Reddit, it's Clubhouse, Facebook, whatever, go into these communities. If you do a property podcast, go into a property Facebook group, ask questions, say you've got a podcast, say what topics you want to know.
And then, now, I was going to say, now obviously things are opening up again. If you go to networking events, you can just feel the things that come from there and think, actually, that's a really good topic. I'll note that idea down, right? Maybe a voice note to yourself or write it down or whatever. And then later on, when you're like, I always say, you know, when you see something that's interesting, always bookmark it or make a note of it somewhere. And then when you go to like, cool, I need to record something, I've got my list of things that I wrote down. You know, you might go through that and think, they're all right. And then, I remember that one, that was really good. And it spurs the inspiration. Yeah, and that could even be just a conversation on the phone. Like, you know, some people you know, people like David Siegler, trainers for Progressive, Kevin McDonald, whatever, you know, they do mentoring and stuff, and they frequently get like a question from a mentee or whatever, and you'll think, actually, you know what, it's an obvious question to Kevin, right? And it might be an obvious question to David or an obvious question to us, but actually it's a solid question because a lot of people are going to ask that question, and you just explain it because you know what the answer is already. So you just teasing that information out. Yeah,
absolutely.
Cool.
Okay,
I like that one.
Yeah, that was a good question. So, okay, how do I film my podcast? So I'm going to assume this is those that have listened to our advice and are going to repurpose their podcast into a visual show. It's going to go on to like a paywall or YouTube, repurposed. How do they film it? What are the best practices?
Cool. I mean, it's kind of I add a little bit more context. So it's like, how do I film my podcast effectively, right? Because you can film it any way you want. Much like when people say, how do I record my podcast? How do I do it right? Or maybe like the easiest way to just get started, right? So how do I start recording? I mean, if we're using Zoom right now, we could be recording this could be a podcast, leverage it for a video for YouTube, do both. That's like the most default answer, right? Which is Skype, Zoom. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that use video, StreamYard, and any of these platforms. If you're recording the video as well, you've already got it, right? So we've got some clients, they're getting up to like 400 episodes. A good 300 of his episodes are Zoomed. If he's got one of those videos still, he's got potentially 300 videos to pick from, and you could just slap the video straight up onto YouTube and be done with it. But the very basic principle is I've got the consolidated video, and generally Zoom stuff is like 80% quality as long as you've done a good job of like the practices beforehand. So like the camera's like here in front of you. So generally speaking, that would be like the basic. If you're using Zoom, StreamYard, whatever, just take that video and use that. But I know you're going to have way more like, no, that's horrible advice. If you want to be way better with these things,
no, like
you're a video guy.
If you start with Zoom, that is great. There's just some things to be aware of with Zoom. So obviously, like you run the risk because everything is on Zoom these days. You do run the risk of kind of falling into the sea of everything kind of looking the same, which I'm sure you've all seen it, like badly lit, like blown out things, windows behind you, and being filmed on a bad internet connection, so you get the all pixels and blocks and stuff like that. So some real basic things, if you are going to be doing it on Zoom, just make sure you've got like a good solid internet connection that's not getting like messed with or anything, because it's hard to take those pixel qualities out.
So we're having this conversation literally 5 minutes ago. If at all possible, hardwired, LAN cable. Obviously if you're on Wi-Fi, then like things like washing machines, fridges, dishwashers, large electronics weirdly do actually interfere. So even if you're the same distance in one direction, it might actually have a better signal if you're the other way, because you're nowhere near something that generates all these hidden frequencies we can't see. So I mean, like, if your router's in the living room, recording your living room, you can move some furniture around, make it look nice behind you. Because like you were saying, you could just have a white wall behind you, but it might do a bit of dressing, put a plant there or something. Something more interesting. I know some of our hosts have started getting things like banners made, or what are your thoughts about green screens and those things?
I would avoid, especially if you're using the built-in ones in Zoom, don't use those green screen effects, because like they're fun and everything, right? But one, they're not tailored to you, so they're very generic. So it's not like, and two, it's easier to, I think it looks more professional if you just have if you want your branding like behind you, but you don't have something like this, to actually just have the little square of your logo in the corner of your video and put it in.
Like a shop, so you wouldn't put it in like 20 quid or something like that.
Like, exactly. Like, because you don't want your edges to cut off. Like, we've all seen those videos where people waving and the hand disappears, and like
shirt's the wrong color, so they're invisible.
And then if you haven't got optimal lighting anyway, it doesn't work for you, and it's harder. Again, once you've recorded it, you can't take those things out. If you want those things and you really want to get into, I really want these green screen things, it's easier to apply that in post with some like cropping and stuff like that. One thing I will say is that we do see in some that we edit is, if you are filming on Zoom and a webcam, placement of that webcam is vital. So like, if you're like me, you can't really grow like full beard. Like, if you have your camera thing a bit too low, you're gonna have a double chin, and some people aren't gonna like that. If you've got downward lights, you're gonna get bags, and again, you might not want that. It's just something. So it's always good if you're doing it on like a Zoom thing, get like a little laptop stand, or even put it on some books. So it's just level. Be aware of a thing called headroom. Like, you can see the camera guys got like, we're like kind of perfectly framed here with a decent amount of headroom.
Cool.
Yeah, and lighting is always, just have a little bit of lighting, right? Don't have the light behind you, so you got like a halo and your face is dark. Like, but even if you need to sit by a window, just get a little desk lamp, like kind of here in proximity, so it's kind of like giving you a bit of light there. And
so a lot of people could be doing it on these phones. Luckily, I've got a nice large phone, so you can sort of see, obviously, whether it's forward facing or rear facing. Again, like if you've got it at this angle, it's gonna look like this. You end up looking like a thumb, which is horrendous. But equally, we don't want MySpace angles, right? We don't want that. It's a bit of a throwback for people there. So you're saying basically nice and high, which you can do with like a Joby or a stand. Again, if you go on Amazon, there's like infinite numbers of phone stands and stuff, right? But one thing I've noticed, actually very cost effective, they're quite useful, these stands that have a ringlet.
Yeah.
powered by USB, and yeah, they're about £5. They're a bit naff, but actually, if you've got it directly in front of you, it sits around your phone, and it offers nice diffused soft lighting, so it will give you relatively okay lighting in a rather if you've not got a good space. I know those are okay. Some people have got some good success using those.
Yeah, those ring lights, and also it's some people really want this as well, and that is how you get that like kind of halo effect in your eyes. It is through ring lights with those, and it's directly in it. But like you mentioned, price there, you don't have to go expensive when you start with. Like that is a mistake we see all the time. People will like spend like, okay, I've got £1,000 DSLR, I've got this £500 lens, I've got this £900 lighting setup.
Yeah,
I mean, but it can still look like the money doesn't guarantee it to look amazing.
I mean, we've got like a racking, obviously off camera, which you guys can't see here, full of stands for our lights. We've got these big LED panels that you can adjust the coloring and all this. You don't need any of that.
Yeah,
and just needs, again, we were talking about this about 5-10 minutes ago. The phone cameras are phenomenal, like at doing really good automatic like settings for you. So as long as the lighting is good enough, like there's no casting of shadows, the angle's good. Like I said, we've not got a giant light behind us. It's all in front, so we're all well lit, and that's what you need. And the phone pretty much does the rest for you. Zoom, again, like with the audio, it does a bunch of stuff with the video, so it will never be like 4K quality, right? But it will be nice enough as long as like the internet connection is stable and the lighting's good. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So basically,
probably off topic a little bit there. We've gone down a rabbit hole.
No, it's fine.
Maybe a new question.
I'll bring it back round. There is a comment. If you can just speak a little bit louder, please, Aaron.
Yep.
So it's sort of the same topic, but slightly different question, which is the kit that they need to buy. So obviously, one thing that we say to all of our clients is it's just about getting your content right. You don't need to spend a fortune. Too many people go out spending so much money. So I would say 9 out of 10 people at the moment that are doing interview podcasts and they're doing the video Zoom because they can't travel, which is the benefit of the pandemic is that expectation of what the video is going to look like is slightly lower. Zoom is accepted.
But also, so pre-pandemic, I was recommending Zoom as a free one-to-one platform for recording video because you could do the separate audio. If you use a decent microphone, Zoom actually did a good job of relatively keeping good quality on there, and it didn't completely obliterate the audio or video when the connection drops. So it's actually very stable. It's quite good. But the problem was people were like, what's Zoom? I don't know what this is. Like Skype. Yeah, I love Skype. And Skype, unfortunately, is not on a par in terms of like how reliable or good it is. But obviously, since the pandemic, everyone doing those pub quizzes, right? At the beginning, everyone remember that? Yeah. Everyone knows what Zoom is now. Everyone's probably got it on their phone, like their computers, whatever. So if I said to like someone now, likelihood, let's do a remote meeting, they're going to be like, cool, send me a Zoom link. I don't even have to explain. People have got it. It's easy to use. So we're in a good position now where if I send you a Zoom link, you're going to click on it, it'll work. You don't have to like explain how to use it, which was, again, pre-pandemic, that was the thing. That's another benefit of, COVID and all of the past year and a half. Yeah.
So, okay, for an example, so someone's got their laptop, they're about to do their interview. Would you suggest they use their phone, their laptop, the built-in webcam, an external webcam? How about microphones? Talk us through it all. Give people their shopping list for those that haven't started yet.
So one thing you definitely mentioned there, which I'd like to like hammer into everybody is audio is like, we're talking a lot about video here because it all gets repurposed, but your video really is only good as your audio, right? Like if you went and watched like a Peter Jackson film, like Lord of the Rings, it was shot really bad, but the sound is all like not good. Like you will get put off it straight away and then you click off. So having we recommend lapel mics that are literally a tenner. And I didn't even believe Aaron. I came in here being all bigoted about price, right? And I did not believe Aaron that you could get a lapel mic for a tenner that sounds good. And I was testing it and it's blown away. Like it's so worth it. And then if you're doing it through Zoom as well, if you go into the record settings, make sure you press separate audio, right? Because like your guest might be like recording in like a kitchen or something, which is a big no-no.
Or even just the tone of voice. And I always give a really, really stark example, which would be if one of you was Queen Elizabeth II and the other one was Brian Blessed. One of them is more softly spoken, doesn't have any low end. The other one's extremely dynamic and loud. But if you don't have any control over that mix, you're sort of stuck with whatever Zoom did. Yeah. Separate audio gives you both separately as well. So you can then do, again, like I could be having a meeting with UK and your neighbor's dog is just constantly in the background. And again, like we can't take that out of my voice when when you're not talking, if it's all slapped together. But obviously we've got the two, as an editor, I've got the separate audios. I think with recording this, all of us have got separate tracks. We can tweak levels and things like that. And we can do the mix ourselves the way that we want to do it. And that's something, it's, you know, again, Zoom does a good job of mixing the audio. It's not like to be like, oh, it's terrible or anything like that. But when you're editing it, there's a lot of things you can not necessarily fix, but improve yourself. Things like, I'm a very monotonous sounding voice. So the way that I would edit my voice is completely different to say like Rob, for example. And again, Rob was very dynamic, up, down in terms of like the actual theatrics of his voice and things. So the way that we would do, you know, I'm a more consistent tone and volume, whereas Rob's like woo, up and down, and you would edit the voices differently to then make it sound good together. It's kind of hard when, like I said, if you're like Queen Elizabeth and Brian Blessed and like you can't hear her over him because he's just so aggressively loud, or it makes it much harder to edit the audio or video. And like you said, if you're whether it's a webcam, your phone camera, or your laptop, obviously probably phone or laptop, you've already got those, right? So just use what you've got. Try before you buy. You know, you might find actually the camera's perfectly fine on that. You don't need to improve on it. Again, like I said, cameras on phones are really good. You might, again, the Zoom video is always going to be limited anyway. So, you know, you could go and get like a Blackmagic box to go into your computer, buy a DSLR camera like the ones we're using, and like have 4K video, and then your guest looks like a potato. So what's the point?
There's one thing to kind of note on that video like front is again okay, so sometimes you I know it's really alluring to want to include all the sorts of beauty effects that you get on stuff. So you don't have to do any editing. Okay. Filters, they eat away at the bandwidth, right? Your processing and anything is like, they are very processor heavy. So what I will always say is do any effects processing you want afterwards, because otherwise what you end up getting is the frame rate just gets demolished on your video. So instead of having a nice smooth 30, you get choppy, really choppy. So you kind of and and you can't fix that afterwards.
Can't undo it.
That's the main thing. You can't like undo stuff afterwards. So it's always best to like, it's like in woodworking, right? They say like measure twice, cut once, not the other way around. And so it's the same with that. Like I would always as well, if you're doing like a Zoom podcast, like I'd always want, I know it is an extra bit of kit, but I would have an external audio device picking up at least your audio separately at the same time. Like that's maybe that's a bit more of an intermediate.
There's levels to this, and obviously I've got many years talking to lots of different people about this. And if all of your interviews are on Zoom and you're using a laptop or computer or whatever, yes, to an external microphone. However, for the sake of ease, honestly, for me, as long as you've got headphones, by the way, if you're doing anything in Zoom, wear headphones, because like the bleed, so like much like we're talking now, and a bit of my voice will be in Kane's mic, a bit of my voice will be in James' mic, but we're in the room together, so there's no delay. But when you, and I'm sure we've all been in a call where it starts to like whistle and feedback because it's going through one mic and coming out to speak and coming back through again. You can mute yourself immediately by wearing a pair of headphones. And I know some people, I get this all the time, like, oh, but Aaron, the headphones aren't very pretty. When I'm doing an audio podcast, I don't care. I don't see that. I just hear it. So all I care about is what I'm hearing. But generally, you know, like if we're looking at a video that's been recorded on Zoom and someone's wearing headphones, much like if there's a microphone in shot, we've all seen Joe Rogan, they're wearing headphones, microphones. Many podcasts do that. It's fine. Like we know what they are. No one's gonna be like, why are they wearing headphones? I couldn't possibly watch this, unsubscribe. But that's not a thought process that happens. So, you know, generally speaking, you know, you can get AirPods and things like that if you want to hide them. But like headphones are like kind of required. You do it bad, like you said, audio bad, then the whole video. So it doesn't matter how good the video is if you can't hear what's happening.
Yeah, I've just seen a really good comment in the chat as well. You can't, if you're hosting the Zoom call, don't do it from your phone, do it from your laptop because you need to be able to record the video. Your guests can be on a mobile device still, but yeah, you definitely. And can I just actually add one thing that's always really handy to have as well? Just in case like something happens and you have to like resync everything, you've got the audio that's separate from the video. Before you start, sync clap. It's so good because then you can literally you can see that spike in the audio waveform in the beginning, and you can easily sync that up. That's just like
So again, I just realized I went off track, but I'm just gonna rewind quickly. USB mic, and then just let Zoom do what it wants to the audio, because again, generally that quite, as long as the microphone's nice and close here, I've got headphones on, you'll sound great. And I say here, not here, because you'll get loads of problems if it's directly in front of your face. Again, like this is not a very good camera shot, but the microphone's here, we can still see my lovely beard and things. But like that is like, that will give you like 85% of it, most of your quality there. And then anything you do in editing is only going to raise it a little bit. Obviously you could, if you want to then go the next level, which is what Jamie was saying, you could then do something like QuickTime or other record at the same time simultaneously, which will give you a untouched version of that audio. So basically what it was before Zoom did anything to it. And then you'd have even more audio files that you can consolidate, or you can do what we used to recommend on Skype and stuff, which is wearing a H1N and a lav. And you could then consolidate that audio. Again, but how do I sync it up? Obviously, without a sync point, it doesn't take us very long, maybe like 3 minutes. You can figure it out, but it's really easy if you just do a clap, because there'll be a nice snap on all of our mics. And we've all seen the films with the clapper boards. That's what they're for. They sync up all the audio tracks. So then in editing, the audio, they just all together. They can sync them all up.
Okay, so we've got a question, but I just want to touch on what you said, Jamie, a minute ago about having an external recording device. This is really important if you're repurposing like a Facebook Live or an Instagram. Yeah. And again, you're going back to an example of Rob. He does this all the time. He's going to have his iPhone for his Facebook Lives out here. He might be outside or whatever, or he's walking about. The microphone sounds crap, but then he's got his Zoom H1, his lapel mic, it's picking up his audio, and then you can obviously sync it.
An example of this is, I'm just going to do a live example. So obviously, microphone, a lav mic should be here, right? So if you imagine this is your phone, and we just move it all the way over here. I can't hear how that sounds, but I know that's not going to sound anywhere near as nice as it does, as it should, which is, if I get it back on where it should be here. And the example, obviously, phones do a good job of picking up that audio from a distance, but we've all been on a call where someone's like, I'll just put you on speaker, and it's horrific. And again, much like this room we're in now is what you call bright. There's lots of reflections and stuff, but you'll hear all of that because when you're moving this microphone away from you, you're basically reducing your volume to match that of your surroundings. So what happens is all that sound that's around you, let's say you're running around in the street, or like Rob does when he goes for a walk, right? Does a rant or something, cars are going past and everything. And unless he's holding his phone here, which he does sometimes, we get very nice close-ups of his face, but more often than not, like you said, he's got it on a stand, it's really far away. He will record his audio again with a H1N, and usually, when if we repurpose that for YouTube or anything, if we've got that separate audio, we just use the H1N, because the H1N audio will be better. And that's kind of like what we're describing for Zoom calls or Skype or whatever. I do have an addendum, actually. So if you're doing, it's all right, it's relevant. If you are going to do in-person recordings like this, or remote calls, or a combination of both, I would definitely look at the P4, PodTrack P4. So it's like a H4N, but it's better because it's designed specifically for podcasters. So you get 4 inputs, 4 headphones. So we could record 4 people, all of us wearing headphones at the same time, really good, right? But also you can bring in remote guests and have all of those. So I could have 3 people and a telephone, or 3 people and a computer. But that computer could be Zoom, it could be running a webinar like this. It could also be anything of your choice, because what it does is called Mix Minus, which some people have seen me, I've gone on about this for a bit, but basically it allows me to record my voice gloriously separate before it goes anywhere. The PodTrack P4 sends that audio down to either the computer or your phone. If you're in Clubhouse, right, it gives you fantastic audio in Clubhouse. If you're on a live, it gives you the audio from the mic that you're using on your PodTrack rather than your not so great phone audio. So you can sort of do both of those things with this little piece of kit, and I can give more information on that another time, but I think I can spend 45 minutes talking about that.
Yes, you could.
Yeah.
So let me kind of add on to that. So the question from Jenna is video recording recommendations for in-person interviews. So scrap Zoom. I know you've mentioned the P4.
So this, if we were recording this with studio equipment.
So there is this thing called the line, right? And you don't want to cross the line. So if you've got in-person interview, it's 3 cameras would be awesome to have. So your phone, again, fine. Phones are so good these days. You don't need to go out and get 3 DSLRs. Just kind of 3, I guess you don't really need 3, but 3 would be awesome. 2 is a minimum, right? So you'd have them kind of sat on one side.
Like we have. So we've got this camera here, and then we've got one over there.
So yeah, exactly. So you'd have, you'd set them up. So one thing important to note on that is is framing for when you're cutting. So I'm here in this side of the screen, right? Yeah. What you want to frame your second camera as your second guest is they're on the other side of the screen. So they'd be where Aaron is sat, right? Because otherwise you have a weird cut where you want it, every time you cut, you want the person to be on the other side of the screen. That's just a little film school 101 thing you learn on there. So,
so we could do one camera, but it's kind of just a flat recording, right? Nothing really changes. You can't do anything clever like camera 1, camera 2, this.
So it'd be like how it is now.
Like this. So it just and this is, it's okay, right? But you're saying if you have another device like an iPad, right? Or an old phone that's sat in a cupboard or something, and the camera, might differ in quality, but it'd still be good enough, right? You could have like set up, like you said, left and right, one for each person. You can then get a nice shot between the two, and you can just jump between the two and everything. I think it's solid.
So for in-person interviews, and also if you are doing kind of in-person interviews, kind of lav mics are always the best, because obviously it depends which room you're in, and I'm sure we'll get on to sound quality and room size in a bit, but it's good to have the lapel mics there. So like your basics of in-person interview, this is what you want. You want 2 filming devices, so you could at least have one wide safety shot and one on the person, and the other is some sort of external audio recording device where you can put kind of lav mic audio into, because
like you could have
the cameras.
What we usually recommend is something like, if I had 2 H1Ns, right, and we can do a clap when we start recording with those, to sync that audio with the cameras as well. The H1N, one per person, we could walk around the room if we really wanted to, and we're not tethered to each other. There is a really gammy way of connecting 2 lav mics to a H1N. You can do it, but then it means like you're sort of tethered together with this device. It's a bit weird. It's like an umbilical cord between the two of you. You can't really move too much, but that can be done as well. Again, you can get like 20-foot lav mics. I've never really used them because the idea of a 20-foot unbalanced cable is just not very good. You'll pick up all sorts of horrible noise generally, but you could have one of those going into the phone, for example. But there are the audio on the cameras as well, but it won't, as soon as you start moving that device away from you, like I said, you're dramatically reducing your volume or presence in that audio, and then all the sound around is basically going to be matching you, and then that's where you end up like, I'm sure we've all been in a Zoom call where one person's in their kitchen and I'm just at the other side making a cup of tea, and it's you can't hear anything, and it's just like a horrendous like shiny horrible room sound that you can't sort of do anything with. Again, like direction and distance are the 2 most important things, so it has to be like the right distance between you, so nice and close, like saying with lav mic, nice here. If it's a standalone mic, it wants to be nice and close to your face or in your body. But if you've got like cameras, generally you bring them closer, you might fix that problem. But generally, like you're saying, lav mics all the way, definitely on that, because 2 H1Ns is like £200 or less. If you've got like a H4 or a P4 or another field recorder, you could do 2 of them into that. Just make sure you've got something with a bit of length on the cable, so you don't have to like huddle together on a couch because the cable's like this long. Yeah, cool.
Okay, so Jim will be joining us shortly for another success story, which was nice. Okay, so the remainder of the questions are mostly focused on repurposing.
Yeah.
So let's paint a picture. Someone is a podcast host. They do interview shows for the majority, and they want to know, before they go into a recording, what does the host need to know beforehand in order to create good content that will work on multiple platforms?
Okay. Know what platforms you're going to be putting out to. I think that's important, especially in the age kind of like with TikTok, for example. Like, obviously we see that the content that works best with TikTok is, for example, kind of anything that looks the most user generated. So if you know that you're going to be repurposing stuff for TikTok, cut it in a way where it kind of looks more
like it's been filmed on my phone, like it's off the cuff,
like it's off the cuff and anything, because people can sense, like, I don't know what it is, I don't know what the psychology behind it is, but people could just sense when you're an outlier.
If it's like this, like that's the man, that's been done in the studio. I want like people that not businesses, I guess. People get turned off by it, right?
Yeah.
It's the kind of communities, whatever you find in TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. While you're having your conversation, while you're having your conversation, it's worth making mental notes. I mean, if you can get somebody, if you've got the resources to have an extra person take some notes, that'd be amazing. But it's worth just either rewatching it and going through, or as you're doing it, make a mental note. Oh yeah, about 20 minutes in, this is going to be a great thingy clip. And just see when you're looking, when you're going through and you're going through your clips, try and put a clickbaity YouTube title to it. Like, what can the attention grabber be for this bit of conversation that's going to happen? And you'll see, like, it doesn't even have to be like the entire conversation about this. Like, if you see on any repurposed YouTube stuff, like there's everyone always has a clips channel, right? They have their main YouTube one, and they have their clips channel, and the clickable title is always, it doesn't have to be what the entire video is about. It maybe it's just something that somebody says somewhere in the clip
without context. So it's a question without context that begs more. I need to understand what's happening, because otherwise, without context, it sounds erroneous or ridiculous, right? I think that's solid. When you were talking about notes, obviously, when you're having a conversation, there's a couple of different things you could do. You could be more guided on your interview. So I know my interviews are always going to be 20 minutes, because that way it's easy for me to repurpose that, because it's only 20 minutes long. But equally, and one of the things I do whenever I've had to look for clips or look for segments in any podcast is, it's almost always going to be the guest, right? So if you're promoting a podcast, right, and you're interviewing David Attenborough, no one really cares what I said in that interview with David Attenborough. They want to hear what David said, right? So immediately, I only have to look at the bits where David's talking, right? So I listen to the end of where I'm talking. It's usually going to be like the last 5 seconds of the question. So I'll be like, David, what was this, right? And then he'll have like a minute